We think you should actually be cutting Jameson Williams because there are a lot of guys that have just as much rostership percentage that you could be adding instead. So cut Jameson Williams. Why? Well, look at Jameson Williams' last game. JMO played 44% of snaps last game. He had 6 targets, and he brought in approximately 0 of those. We knew, coming into the season, we knew if Jameson Williams was actually going to play, that he was probably going to be very big play dependent. And you've seen that in his first 3 games. In his first game, he had 3 targets. He did have 2 catches, but he only had 2 points. And then in his second game, he had a touchdown. So now you have Jameson Williams getting a touchdown, and he has 13 points. And then last game, he gets the most targets he's gotten, which you like, okay, that's actually a good sign. The Lions were also missing some receivers this game,
and playing a lot of garbage time where they were just chucking the ball downfield for the heck of it.
But he didn't even bring in a single one of his targets.
Correct, and he dropped a few too.
So we got Jameson Williams route tree on the screen, but who do you add instead of Jameson Williams? If you're going to cut Jameson Williams, who should we say that you're going to add? And it should be Josh Downs. These guys, their rostership percentage: Jameson Williams 63%, Josh Downs 51%. And looking at Josh Downs' last 3 games, 15 points on 6 targets, 13 points on 8 targets, and 23 points on 6 targets. This last game, he had his first 100-yard game of his career. Josh Downs is a guy that, again, we drafted a ton of in best ball. And now you're seeing this play out. He was a very good prospect. He's slid in the draft, obviously, but we stood by that he was a very good prospect in the 87th percentile against man his last year versus in college. And in terms of his success rate against the man, that's fairly good. And also 86th percentile against press. And you see that success translating over now to the NFL. He's played 2 games where he's had 3 or fewer receptions, and those 2 games were the 2 games Anthony Richardson played above 95% of the snaps. And Anthony Richardson's out. So naturally, although we're bummed as Colts fans, Gardner Minshew is better for Josh Downs here. And Josh Downs is absolutely going to get more targets and outscore Jameson Williams for the rest of the season, in our opinion.
Yeah, and I think Gardner Minshew getting 2 rushing touchdowns against the Cleveland Browns is not something you're going to consistently see, because overall I think you're going to get a lot of opportunities in the red zone for those receivers and for the running backs, even more than you would have with Anthony Richardson, obviously taking away a lot of that rushing upside. The next couple guys that we're going to have here, the first one being Elijah Moore. You need to be cutting Elijah Moore. He's currently rostered in 58% of leagues. And when you're looking at his production over the last few weeks, he's on the field. He's on the field, and he's not getting the production that we were hopeful that he could get. 4 targets, 7 targets, and 7 over the last few weeks. And even with that target volume over against San Francisco and Indy, which is okay, he only pulled in 4 receptions apiece and no touchdowns, and it's not a lot of yardage overall. Look, I don't really know what upside Elijah Moore is going to offer you this season with Deshaun Watson playing so poorly, with PJ Walker having to come in for Deshaun Watson consistently, and the fact that Amari Cooper is struggling to get his own in that offense anyways. If anyone's going to produce there, it's going to be Amari Cooper. Elijah Moore is at best the second option consistently, and what does that mean in Cleveland's offense? Not very much. Not very much right now.
Pretty much everybody there has been underwhelming this year. From a fantasy football's perspective, absolutely. Yep. Deshaun Watson has been. David Njoku is the tight end 10 right now, but it's. That literally means nothing. He has 2 games in double figures.
Right.
So it doesn't mean anything. People will point to that, but Elijah Moore's been underwhelming. Honestly, Amari Cooper has been underwhelming, and we've projected Amari Cooper to take a step back up. But if they keep playing this bad, I don't even know. Now, that said, they did put up 38 points even
thanks to the defense.
But they're playing the Colts.
Well, they're playing the Colts.
And the defense had points. You're right.
The defense forced, I think, 4 turnovers.
Yeah.
They scored a touchdown of their own. They got it into the red zone for multiple of those, at least in their own territory, those turnovers. And then obviously like a 20-plus point game from their kicker, who had a ridiculous amount of field goals. So ultimately it was like, how effective was Cleveland's offense? Well, if anyone watched that game, it was actually really, really rough to watch.
It's not really an offense like I'm trying to go get pieces of right now, by any means.
No.
It's really not.
Yeah, and look, overall, wide receiver in fantasy football is pretty volatile once you get into these guys like Elijah Moore, where you can kind of pick him up, drop him, and you're not feeling bad either way. We're just recommending that you get rid of Elijah Moore and go pick up Kyler Murray instead. 47% rostership right now. Obviously, the news coming out that he is he has a 21-day window to be removed from the PUP list after rehabbing his knee over the offseason. And when you're looking at Josh Dobbs really struggling over the last couple of games, I think his magic is coming to a close, and they're going to want to see what they have in Kyler Murray before deciding what they're going to do with him in the offseason. And I think Obviously, that means letting him play the second half of the season. Is he going to have the same amount of rushing upside that he's had in past years? I would say probably not. I think that's fair to say. Does it matter for me when you're talking about a guy who's on waivers who will likely be starting for the second half of the season when a lot of people find a lot of value in a backup quarterback in 1 QB leagues for some reason? Yeah, I think there's some value there, some trade bait that you can get with Kyler Murray. And this isn't just his rushing upside, guys. I think his passing ability has always been very overlooked as a talent in the NFL. I mean, A, you're talking about a guy who was drafted in the first round to play baseball, and B, like, you watched him play and you saw his efficiency metrics as a passer for the first 3-4 years of his career, and that was good. Very, very good. A ton of passing volume, throwing consistently more than 30 times a game. I mean, this is going to help everyone in that offense, and obviously that'll result in him scoring points and probably producing at least as a high-end QB2 consistently on a weekly basis.
I mean, you're not picking up Kyler Murray for his rushing upside because, like Nathan said, he's not getting that upside back probably till next year. I mean, when you're recovering from an ACL like that, you just aren't able to move as well, especially cutting on the field. So we know that. Kyler Murray is a passer. I mean, Kyler Murray, you're talking about one of the most underrated, most hated players in the NFL, in my opinion. I mean, he gets a lot of crap, and he's a very talented passer, and he's very capable, very good playmaker, and obviously a lot of that has to do with his legs, but I think a lot of people are going to go get Kyler Murray, and rightfully so, because the quarterback position, honestly, is kind of a mess right now. It kind of is. So I don't blame people at all for wanting to go get Kyler Murray. I do blame people if they're not cutting Antonio Gibson at this point. I do. Antonio Gibson, I mean, man, do you remember when he was going in the third round of Dynasty startups 2 years ago? Like, that was, oh my gosh. Yep. The last 4 games, 3 points, 10 points, 8 points, 5 points, which is like, yeah, it's serviceable, but are you starting that? No. And if this isn't a player that you're consistently like thinking about starting, it's a cuttable player. 38% snap share, 54, 39, 38. It's like, I mean, we thought Antonio Gibson would be the lead back even after they drafted Brian Robinson, and they just straight, I mean, when you look at the usage, it just straight hasn't been that way. I mean, Brian Robinson's getting about half of all the snaps, and then Antonio Gibson's getting like maybe 2/3 of the remaining snaps, and then it's Chris Rodriguez. Like, I mean, there's nothing I'm seeing here that makes me think, I mean, not to mention Brian Robinson's getting all the goal line snaps. He's getting all the short yardage snaps. I mean, Antonio Gibson clearly is the third down back there, but again, looking at that offense and looking at that production, what good is it? I mean, he has 1 target, 2 targets, a game of 6 targets, and the game of 6 targets, naturally, it was the game he had double figures, and then 1 target.
Yeah.
So there's no consistency there.
No, and I think situationally, a lot of people going into this season were expecting Gibson to have a little more upside with Bieniemy coming in as the offensive coordinator. You're seeing what he did with Kansas City for so many years, had a lot of gadget guys, had a lot of explosive playmaking ability there, and you're like, okay, this could really apply to Antonio Gibson this season. Bieniemy could get really creative with him. He obviously has a pass of being a receiver. He was a receiver in college, and then he kind of translates to running back in the NFL, looks pretty good, but isn't super efficient because he's smaller, just not as great of a runner, doesn't have phenomenal vision. Maybe Bieniemy can kind of have a Antonio Gibson resurgence or be the reason that happens. And it just hasn't. Ultimately, Curtis Samuel has really taken that role as the gadget guy, as the third option who is really effective there outside of Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. I think it was a 50-50 shot between those two because Brian Robinson is more of your traditional NFL running back. And if you took a shot on Gibson, you missed. If you took a shot on Samuel, you hit.
But I mean, realistically, between the two of us, like how much were we actually drafting these?
Not very often. I wasn't drafting any of them.
And why?
Because I didn't know who it was going to be.
Because it was like it's one of the heaviest committees in the NFL.
Yeah, and if someone told me to bet on which player it would have been earlier in the season, I would have said Gibson, and I was wrong. But
so you're not alone. But
yeah.
And you should be adding Darrel Henderson instead. And that backfield's honestly a mess too. And it's another one where it's like, how would we have known who to draft? Well, it's why Kyren Williams was a waiver wire darling because nobody knew that. I mean, I think a lot of people were drafting Zach Evans. I honestly think that was it. But Darrel Henderson, remember Darrel Henderson? He actually got cut last year. Now he's back. And looking at last week's running back usage for this team, I mean, he was getting more than half of the snaps. So clearly he's the guy that they're going to... I mean, Royce Freeman also getting a fair amount of snaps. You look at the early downs, 27-19 in favor of Henderson. All plays, it was 39-29. So he did out-snap him. But as long as Kyren Williams is out, and even Ronnie Rivers... I mean, I think Darrel Henderson's just a name that offense is going to be comfortable with. And you saw it in this last game. He had 13 points. You're talking about flexible fantasy production at this point.
Yeah.
If you have 18 attempts for 60 yards or whatever, I mean, like
that's what I care about is the volume. The 18 carries, that's phenomenal for a really nice floor when a lot of people in fantasy right now are desperate for reliable, high floor running backs that you can plug in because of injury, because of devastating bye weeks like we just had with 6 teams out of the running. Like, how many guys were you being forced to throw in this week? There wasn't really much that you could take away from the week other than Darrel Henderson being one of those guys who you can probably flex if you need to until Kyren Williams is back. And I do want to kind of pick your brain here. I was thinking about this. Obviously, Zach Evans did literally nothing. A lot of people were asking us about Zach Evans last week.
And you remember I said on the live stream, I was like, I'm actually not sure they're going to give Zach Evans the ball at all.
Right.
And it's a good thing we said that because
Correct.
like you just don't know. And I think a lot of people came to that realization before the game on Sunday. Like, you actually don't know who's going to be in this backfield. But now we have our answer. And so once you do, I mean, I think I'm comfortable adding him now.
Yeah. And with Evans, do you think he'll eventually, as time progresses, do you think he'll start to eat into this workload? Do you think he'll take away from Freeman or Henderson or both?
Was he 5th round, Evans?
6th round, I think.
I mean, they don't have that much in him. Like, if they don't, here's the thing. I don't think, if they think that he's not ready, they're not going to play him. Because the other thing about the Rams this year is they're slightly better than consensus thought they would be, which means that in a weaker NFC bottom, like, they could be playoff hunting. They're obviously not going to win that division, but they could be trying. I mean, because they've got a good enough offense, in my opinion. I don't think they're going to trust rookie Zach Evans this year.
Yeah, I would agree. And with the history of the Rams in general, I mean, you saw a couple weeks ago in Dynasty, like, remember when Henderson was going for first because everyone was so excited about his production when Cam Akers went down. Yeah. I think this is sort of the same situation where Henderson comes in due to injury. He probably produces because he's just another guy. I mean, he's kind of like Alexander Madison, honestly. Yeah. And I really think he's going to be the guy until Kyren Williams comes back. That's just my personal opinion based off of the history that we've seen with McVay. The next guy we're going to have here that we think, if you haven't gotten him off your roster already, please do. I know some of you have listened to us. You've cut him. If you did, well done. A.J. Dillon, guys, still 65% rostered. The man had one of his... had objectively, if you watch the game against Denver, his best game of the year as a runner. 4 yards per carry. Everybody give him a hand. 15 carries for 61 yards and 11 points. Are you kidding me? This dude, I don't understand why they still give him the ball on 3rd and short, 4th and short, goal line carries. He has zero ability. Anyone that watches those games with A.J. Dillon, you cannot tell me with a serious face that A.J. Dillon should be consistently getting the ball like he is. He is so ineffective, and it means nothing for your fantasy team. He is literally, it's name value. 65%, it should be half that.
Well, the rostership is name value. The Packers situation is they don't have anybody else.
Correct.
But, I mean, realistically, like, when are you ever comfortable flexing A.J. Dillon? Even when Aaron Jones is out. If this his ceiling? Against the worst rushing defense, is this his ceiling?
Against Vegas in Week 5, he had a touchdown in 20 carries, 13 points. I mean... And a lot of that is attributed to his lack of receiving upside. He has zero. I'm not exaggerating. He has none. When he gets a target, there's less than a 50-50 chance that he even catches the dang ball. It's so bad.
I mean, he didn't have a reception the last 2 games, and then he had 2 this one.
I mean, would you rather, for the next 5 weeks, would you rather have A.J. Dillon on your roster or Henderson?
Henderson
by far.
Easy.
By far.
Yes.
I completely agree.
Not to mention, I mean, you're looking again at Henderson. Like, he was also getting some goal line carries. Him and Freeman both got one. So I'm way more comfortable with that. And when Aaron Jones comes back, which Aaron Jones will be back.
Yeah, I mean, he was back against Denver, only put up 8 points, but he got
back, like all the way back.
Yeah, it has been reported that he is feeling a lot better, and he's still on the mend a little bit, but I think ultimately you're going to see him in full swing next week, as effective as he was in Week 1 of this season.
Not to mention, the Packers have kind of sucked recently. Actually, not kind of. They really have sucked recently. That offense, I mean, Jordan Love has not looked near as capable as he did in the first 2 games.
He looks like a rookie quarterback. Who knew?
Ironic
Who would
enough.
have ever thought that?
Interesting.
Yeah, and the running back that we will have you add if you're cutting A.J. Dillon, which you should be, go get Tyjae Spears. Yeah. I mean, I know this is another guy who's splitting time with another running back, and it's Derrick Henry. What upside does Tyjae Spears offer ultimately? Not a ton, but with his 50% snap share, he's getting 5, 7, 4 carries over over the last few weeks. But his receiving upside is something to look into. He's had a couple weeks with 4 targets, 5 targets, and he's able to snag a touchdown here and there. He's very, very explosive with his opportunity. And you're looking at the trade deadline coming in October, or at the end of October. I think it's the 31st on Halloween. So, yeah, pumpkins and trade deadline. It's exciting. Derrick Henry is said to be on the move potentially to a contending team. I mean, look at how many contending teams there are in the NFL right now that are short a running back or someone that even wants a stretch or that wants to make a run towards the end of the season.
You know who could use Derrick Henry?
The Vikings.
The Packers.
That's very true. The
he
Vikings
would be
too,
great with he would be great with Aaron Jones, and he would basically be AJ Dillon, but better.
Gosh, because
think about it.
Because AJ Dillon's pro comp has always been Derrick Henry.
Exactly, but it's the real thing now. He would be he'd be perfect there,
You're
wouldn't he?
So right. Yeah. Anyways, ultimately, I really, is it realistic that Derrick Henry will get traded by the deadline? I think there's maybe a 50-50 shot. It's at least possible. Yeah. And that's what we're saying. At this point of the season, there's not a lot of home run hitting waiver ads that you're going to get by week 8. Tyjae Spears is a dart throw that you could potentially hit on, and he is objectively better than AJ Dillon is, and he's making more out of less opportunities. So I think it's a pretty easy flip here where you may have a potential of getting higher upside for the second half of the season.
Yeah, totally agree there. All right. Make sure, drop a like on the video if you enjoyed this one, and make sure you're subscribed if you play fantasy football. We're trying to get to 5K on this channel. So really appreciate it if you help us get there, guys. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you later.